Ketanji. I mean, the woman was in a Broadway show. So like, what's the deal with her? Did they like just pluck her out and say, okay, it's you and we're going to groom you to be a Supreme Court justice? You'd think they'd do a better job educating her, because when you're a Supreme Court justice, it means that you actually have to, believe it or not, read the law, understand the law, and then be able to regurgitate in some way, shape, or form back the law and base all of your arguments in legal theory. But that is not what happened here, okay? And what's happened is that she's gotten very emotional and she's talking about, oh, this won't work, it won't function, it won't be able to succeed because it's in practicality not going to work out. You need to be able to have this nationwide injunction. And you know, that's her feeling, and she's sticking to it. At which point you had her writing, or she had herself writing, quote, "It is not difficult to predict how all of this ends. Eventually, executive power will become completely uncontainable, and our beloved constitutional republic will be no more." So she thinks you're giving too much power into the hands of the president, which again, you know, Amy Coney Barrett is pointing out, you know, we observe only this: Justin Jackson decries an imperial executive while embracing an imperial judiciary. So she wants to have this kind of king-like status for any judge who comes along and who's, you know, not elected by the entire nation. Thank you so much to James Marino again for supporting independent journalism. We love it. Thank you to all of you. But that's kind of a big, big deal. The other thing I would point out is that typically in these sorts of situations, you have a lot of notes going back and forth between the justices as they formulate their arguments, and they'll go back and forth. And for Amy to have written this, it's clear that she really didn't like what Jackson was saying. I'm going to go on quoting Amy. "Quite unlike a rule of kings governing system, in a rule of law," forgive me, this is Jackson. This is Jackson writing. "Quite unlike a rule of kings governing system, in a rule of law regimen, nearly every act of government must be challenged by an appeal to law. At the very least, I lament that the majority is so caught up in the minutiae of the government's self-serving, finger-pointing arguments that it misses the plot." Okay, now what's wrong with that? She has nothing legally to back her up. So again, it's a lot of emotion and it's a lot of fire, almost like she's like a cable news personality, but there's not a whole lot more there. I mean, that's pretty lousy, right? For her to say the self-serving, finger-pointing arguments that misses the plot. And then she went so far as to dismiss the question of whether or not universal injunctions were provided for by the Judiciary Act of 1789 as legalese that, quote, this is great, guys, quote, "obscures a far more basic question of enormous legal and practical significance." This woman writes, "May a federal court in the United States of America order the executive to follow the law?" So Barrett just completely tore her apart, mocked her, and said, because analyzing the government and governing statute involves boring legalese, Jackson seeks to answer a far more basic question of enormous practical significance. May a federal court in the United States of America order the executive to follow the law? In other words, she writes, it is unnecessary to consider whether Congress has constrained the judiciary. What matters is how the judiciary may constrain the executive. This is Amy Coney Barrett smacking her down. Justice Jackson, she writes, would do well to heed her own admonition. Everyone from the president on down is bound by the law. And that goes for judges too. Oh, did LaMonica hear that? Goes for congressmen and congresswomen as well. That was something. I mean, kudos to Barrett, right? That took a lot. She was clearly ticked off. Clearly ticked off, which means probably all those exchanges when they were exchanging legal arguments going back and forth really must have annoyed her. That was brutal. Like that is a brutal takedown of this woman. And you know what? She deserved every bit of it, but it kind of, makes you wonder. Somebody wrote on Twitter, and this is great. New York Post actually published this. Holy, you know what? This is about as brutal as I've ever seen SCOTUS be on their own. This is somebody, I guess, who has a legal background, an attorney named Costas Morris. And he was writing in response to this. And then he wrote, translated, "You are so stupid that you aren't even worth responding to," right? Remember again, because of what she initially said, Amy was like, it's just that bad. We will not dwell on Justice Jackson's argument, which is at odds with more than 2 centuries worth of precedent, not to mention the Constitution itself. Woo! Yeah. Kind of makes you wonder how this woman got the job. I don't know. How'd that happen? But, I would just say that, she's being smacked down rather brutally. Do you know that in her opinion, in her dissent, she didn't even bother to say anything that you would typically see in these things? Like, there's a certain kind of respect that you afford your other justices. And so you'll say, I respectfully disagree, et cetera. They use all these phrases to kind of sort of tone down and then just make it more academic. And instead, she's just thrashing it around out there. Ketanji is. And so this is pretty significant. And they do, as I said, circulate memos in these cases. And so given what she wrote in her dissent, I can just imagine some of the memos. I mean, she must have been freaking out, right? Just totally freaking out. If somebody else, was making the point that the other justices signed on to this, like they had to be okay with this, what Amy Coney Barrett was writing. And it's probably because she showed such a lack of respect, Ketanji did, for the other justices. And so what this shows you is that they're really kind of squeezing her out. They actually praised Sotomayor, and they compared and contrasted. Amy Coney Barrett was like, well, Sonia Sotomayor actually did a good job rooting all of her dissent and disagreement in actual law and legal theory. Well, this one is just putting it all out there, totally emotional, like freaking out. And it just makes you wonder, like, really, is she appropriate for this job? How did she get this job? Well, I guess Biden gave it to her, and I guess they wanted to, plug a certain, I'm sorry, but like, this is what's going to be said. Like she checked a couple boxes, because if you're not actually grounding any of your arguments in real legal theory, then you're not really doing the job. You're not doing what you were expected to be. James Marino, thank you, pointing out that, this is part of the Biden debate, I guess. Look, she was Biden's pick, like for whatever reason, he went forward with this woman, and, she'd really rather be on Broadway, right? Remember she was on a Broadway show? I'm like, stick to Broadway, honey. All right. This whole justice thing is not really for you. I can, maybe you should just do a podcast. You're emotional. I think Joy Reid would welcome you on her show, right? Anyway, I digress. I think the good news here is we're winning. We're winning. Okay. It was a great week for America. Think about all that happened. I mean, going back to last Saturday night. And so we were able to take out, by most all accounts, the sort of ability of Iran to create a weapon. So that's like a big deal. And again, you don't even have to take my word for it. I'm just looking at the markets. Clearly the markets love this. So you have that win. You have a deal getting done with China. Wow. You have birthright citizenship getting struck down, because they're saying, hey, wait a second, the 14th Amendment, it was put in place so that the children of slaves and people who had been brought here against their will in slavery could be guaranteed citizenship. This wasn't for people who decided to come here as tourists. This wasn't for people who decided to, break the law and come here illegally and have a kid. No, that wasn't what this was intended to be. So all of this now will still have to be decided. Just to be clear, what was decided by the Supreme Court, they didn't actually touch birthright, but they said it's not right. A single judge cannot come forward and issue a nationwide injunction. So you can't have one judge over there. That's why Letitia's going to be out of business. And Kathy Hochul and Gavin Newsom and the rest of them that are fighting. You can't have one judge say, okay, we're going to strike this down. And so now you might be in a situation where you have 22 states, and already, you get the ACLU preparing their case against the president, and you're going to see this happen all over the country. But you've got 22 states that are going to say, okay, well, we're going to recognize you as a citizen. And then you have the rest of the states that are saying, well, we agree with Donald Trump. We're not going to recognize you as a citizen if you weren't, we don't believe in birthright citizenship anymore. So then what happens? I'm going to go back to the Constitution, which tells you that, yeah, the federal government actually has say over this naturalization clause. And they do this through the supremacy clause, through the commerce clause, you name it. There's one thing that they control. It's the borders and who's in this country and citizenship. So this will likely bubble up and come to a head under this Supreme Court, probably sooner than you think. So lots happening.